So you want to get started reading the Cosmere. So if you've heard anyone talking about fantasy books lately, you have probably heard the term Cosmere come up. If you want to start reading the Cosmere, there's a couple different books you can start with. And there's definitely a couple that you shouldn't start with. But first, what is the Cosmere? So the Cosmere is basically the universe in which all of Brandon Sanderson's books take place. Now, he does have a few YA books and things that are outside of the Cosmere. So the Cosmere itself, like I said, is the universe in which all the books take place. And I literally mean universe. So it has different planets. So each book series takes place on a different planet. And because these book series are separated literally by different planets, you don't have a lot in the way of crossover, so you can really start anywhere you want to. Unlike some book series like The Wheel of Time, where it's book 1, book 2, all the way through book 15. There's a reading order, and that's how you read them. You can't just jump in anywhere you want. With Brandon Sanderson's work, you can pretty much jump in anywhere you want. Now, because it does take place all in one universe, there are some overarching rules and how things operate, and you do get a lot of benefit from reading multiple series in the Cosmere. That being said, each series stands by itself as far as a great work of fiction that you can read by itself, and you're not missing out on anything if you haven't read a certain series first. And that's great. It gives you a lot of options, but with options, well, now you got to choose. So where do you start? What do you go with? And I have a couple recommendations, and there's definitely some I think are better starting points than others. And there are some that I would recommend to some people, while I wouldn't recommend them to other people. So it depends on your reading style and what you like as far as where I think you should really get into the series. Now, once you're in, you'll be hooked and you'll read everything, but where you start can determine on how eagerly you read the rest of it. Now, the Cosmere as a whole, I think, is like 20 books and novellas and graphic novels. There's a ton of it. But for this, we're just going to be talking about either standalones or first in series. Those are going to be your possible starting points. And that narrows it down to these. But before we get into those, I want to get into the ones that you might think you could start off with, but you definitely shouldn't. First of which is White Sands, which is a graphic novel, and it does technically take place in the Cosmere, and it is first in series, standalone, so you could technically read it first. There wouldn't be any spoilers or anything like that, but it's a graphic novel, and it's not a good representation of what you'd be getting with the other 20 books in the Cosmere. So once you're hooked, once you are enjoying the Cosmere, you can definitely read White Sands. It is worth it. It does add stuff to it. It's good, but it's not a good starting point. Another place you don't want to start is Alouette Law. This is first in series, so you would think it'd be a possible starting point, but it is actually Era 2 of the Mistborn world. The first book, Alouette Law, has a ton of spoilers for the Mistborn series. So you have to read those two series in order. That's one of the few exceptions on this as far as series you can read before other series, because it's really taking place on one planet, so you got to read the first set of books before you read the second set of books, because a lot of the characters and events from the first story are history and lore and legend in the second story. So if you read the second story, you're ruining the first story for yourself. So do not start with the Alouette Law. There are also a couple novellas that you do not want to start with. Dawn Shard and Edge Dancer. They're both excellent novellas, but in reality they're more like chapters in another large series that he does. So if you read those first, you will have no clue who the characters are, what's going on, why any of it's going on. It just throws you into the middle of it because they're really built to be read as companions to larger novels and series that he has. So don't try reading those first, full of spoilers, and you have no clue what's going on. It just would not be a fun read. Now, they are great novellas. You just have to read those as part of another series. Arcanum Unbound. Now you may think this would be a good jumping off point because it is just a collection of short stories. So you wouldn't be getting into that big of a commitment with getting into a really big, long series. But these are a lot like Dawn Shard and Edge Dancer. They have a lot of spoilers in them. They're really meant for diehard fans that are already well versed in the Cosmere, know what's going on, and it's just basically the way I look at Arcanum Unbound is if you've read everything in the Cosmere and you just want more. That's what that's for. Now, finally, to where you can start. You may go to the first book published in the Cosmere, which would be Elantris, and that is a totally viable starting point. I would not recommend it. It is the first one published, but like we've talked about, you don't really have to read these series in certain order. And it being the first book that Brandon Sanderson sold, it's really his weakest writing. It's not to say it's bad writing, it's still a fantastic book, but he gets better as time goes on. So Elantris for me really wasn't my favorite Brandon Sanderson book. And if you're just getting into it and you're wanting to get hooked on the whole thing, then I wouldn't recommend starting out with one of his weaker books. I say weaker, and that doesn't even feel right because even his weakest book is an excellent book, but there are better places to start. And Elantris is a standalone. So if you read it first, you're not committing yourself to a whole series of books. It is just a standalone book. Now, he has talked about writing a sequel to it, but at the moment, it is just a standalone book. Another route you could take if you're looking for a standalone book, and this one is even a very short, a novella standalone, and that's The Emperor's Soul. And this one is actually very, very highly rated, and it's a good story. So if you want to start off with something very short and you can get through in one sitting and just kind of get the feel of Brandon Sanderson's writing, this is actually not a bad place to start off with. It's short, it's good. If you're looking for something to try it out without a big commitment, this is definitely the option I would recommend to you. Another short novella you could start off with just to get the kind of taste for Brandon Sanderson's writing style and see if you like it is going to be The Six of Dusk. This is actually one of my favorite novellas he's done. Just the setting and the character, even though it's very short, it really got me as far as being involved in the story. And it's a slightly darker story, but none of Brandon Sanderson's writing is going to be grim, dark, overly violent, or anything like that. But as far as the stories go, this one is short and sweet, and it does a lot of really good things in a short period of time. So if you're, again, looking for something that's non-committal and short to get into it, this is an option. It doesn't have a second book to it, doesn't tie into a larger series other than the Cosmere as a whole, but it just gives you a good sense of his writing style and see if you like it or not. One of the best places to start in the Cosmere is going to be Mistborn, Era 1. And so that's going to be the Mistborn Final Empire. Fantastic book, fantastic series. I can't say enough good things about it. If you're willing to commit to a whole series, then I would definitely recommend jumping in with Mistborn Final Empire. It's just some of his best work as far as character development, very interesting setting, and one of my favorite magic systems takes place in that book, and my favorite characters from that book. Not just in the Cosmere, just favorite character, period. Now, if you're a little crazy, if you love epic fantasy, and you just want to jump in the deep end right off the bat, The Way of Kings could be the book for you. This is actually how I got started in the Cosmere, is The Way of Kings, and I wasn't even trying to get into the Cosmere. I'd never heard of it. I actually got it as a free sample download randomly and started reading it and was just hooked from the very beginning. Now, I would not recommend this to most people because while The Way of Kings is one of the best fantasy books ever written, and I will stand by that, it has a steep learning curve. It is a massive book. It has a ton of characters, has multiple magic systems, 2 prologues, starts off 10,000 years before the rest of the story does. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But I think if you can commit to reading the entire Way of Kings, the first book, getting through it, you will not regret it. It is a fantastic read and a great book. It is just a lot to bite off if you're just getting started in it. So, Elantris is an option. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is a perfectly viable starting point. You got a couple novellas in there for non-committed people that just want a short sample read of Brandon Sanderson's style. And then you have Mistborn, which I'd recommend to most people as far as where to start off at. And then for you crazy people out there like me, I recommend The Way of Kings. So those are going to be your entry points into a whole world of nerdiness and memes, and you will not regret it. And I will have a list of all the do's and don'ts down in the comments below, along with links to those books if you want to go check them out. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. If you like this kind of thing, subscribe. And if you have read the Cosmere already, or you're currently reading it, let me know down in the comments what book you started with and which one you would recommend to start off with. I find it interesting where different people get into the series at. Again, thanks for watching, and I will see y'all on the next one.